Senator Cornyn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Listening to the testimony today reminded me of a quote from H.L. Mencken, who said that for every complex problem, there's a solution that's simple, neat, and wrong. So that may be why I find myself agreeing with all of you, bits and pieces of what you say, but also disagreeing with all of you in other respects. But let me see if I can find some common ground here. So I'm a big believer in our patent system, and I believe the exclusivity that is provided to people who discover new life-saving drugs ought to be protected. But at the same time, I'm angry when I look at the abuse of the patent system by filing as many as 165 patents for something like Humira. And Dr. Feldman, when you mentioned that some of these patents have nothing to do with the active ingredients in the drug, but rather the delivery devices. In other words, you take a pill as opposed to something some aerosol you inhale or whatever, that this then prevents these incredible life-saving drugs from being more readily available and affordable to Americans. But at the same time, I recognize that if there wasn't the promise of a big financial payoff for the people that do this research, and I think somebody mentioned 12%, maybe Ms. Ulrich, maybe that was you, actual success rate. So that means that 88% of the drugs investigated actually fail, which is one reason why pharma spends so much money on R&D, hoping to hit gold, I guess, for that 12%. So I find myself sort of torn back and forth, and maybe that's the reason why we are where we are. But I do agree with Senator Kennedy. Senator Schumer could put these bills on the floor today if he wanted to. And Mr. Mitchell, you're being way too kind in terms of how busy you think we are here. We're working about 2.5 days a week and hardly breaking a sweat. So we have a lot more room to grow and capacity to deal with important problems like this. And taking up and passing bipartisan bills would be pretty remarkable. And it's in addition to the ones we've talked about here. The Finance Committee has done a lot of work, Ms. Ulrich, on the pharmacy benefit managers that you addressed. The 20-year patent system does not, there's a problem, I think, and you tell me if it's a problem, Ms. Ulrich. So you get 20 years exclusivity, but you may not have a full 20 years of exclusivity because you can't actually sell the drug until the FDA approves it. So there's a lag time frequently. And I think you said effectively the 20 years is 13 years. Is that correct?
Yes, for small molecule drugs, it's around 13 years on average.
I know that Hatch-Waxman many years ago tried to sort of figure out how to deal with that. But it strikes me as that may be some area where we ought to be able to give patent holders the effective use of their patents longer by making sure that the period of the exclusivity ran from the time that it actually was available to be sold as opposed to when it's patented. But that maybe is another discussion for another day. Mr. Mitchell, let me just say, I too wish you well. I'm glad we live in a country where you can get access to life-saving drugs. What I've always been told, though, is that the way that some of these countries, like in Europe, for example, that have national health care systems, deal with this is they restrict the formulary, that is, the drugs that are actually available. Do you know whether the drugs that you take that are saving your life would be available to you if you lived, for example, in Europe? My understanding is the EU only has about 40%.
I'd have to check country by country, but for the most part, the principal medications for myeloma are available abroad. Okay. I do think there's an important issue that you're touching on, and Professor Rye started to talk about it, and that is very important to me as someone who needs innovation. Patent abuse inhibits innovation. If drug companies can raise prices on old drugs that should have competition but don't, and they can raise them at will, then they have much less incentive to invest in the risky, innovative work that can produce new drugs that can extend life.
You and I are of one mind on that.
And so I don't want to just...
The chairman's going to cut me off because my time is up. Let me ask one last question. Does the fact that, according to the most recent figures I've seen, that 40% of the active ingredients in the drugs that Americans consume in this country come from China, does that concern you? After COVID, we became very concerned about supply chain vulnerability, and it strikes me that's a vulnerability. Is that not a problem, or is that a problem? Anybody have a view on that?
It is a problem, yes.
It seems like it.
Yes.
I would think so. And
Indeed it is.
Maybe there'd be a way for us to do more of that.
Well, the FDA needs more resources.
Those active ingredients here in America. I'm sure it's a financial decision.
The FDA needs more resources.
Okay, thank you.